Hello, welcome to another edition of Scotland at 7. It is Gordon Ross here this evening. And it's the 10th of August. Now, joining me on the programme this evening to review the news stories tonight, I have a regular contributor, Sam Payton from Save Loch Lomond campaign. Welcome back, Sam.
Hi, Gordon.
Hi, Sam. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, thank you. How are you doing?
Okay, so despite some slight technical hitches, we're doing fine. And also, welcome back to the programme tonight, Andrew Wilson. Welcome back, Andrew. How are you doing tonight?
Gordon, good evening. I'm fine, thanks. How are you doing?
Well, after a brief glitch earlier on, we're now back up and running. So, welcome to the programme. And as usual, I'm going to go straight to the coronavirus update. And as of 2 p.m. today, a total of 398,160 people in Scotland have now been tested through NHS Scotland labs and UK regional testing centres. Of these, 379,133 were confirmed negative. 19,027 were confirmed positive. There are now 29 new confirmed cases of COVID-19, and there are 0 reported deaths of people who have been tested positive. Who have tested positive today. This will be an underestimate of the number of cases. Not everyone with the virus will display symptoms, and not all those with symptoms will be tested. Of the people who have tested positive, 267 people were in hospital last night, 3 of whom were in intensive care. The number of patients in Scotland who have died from complications caused by a coronavirus COVID-19 infection remains at 2,491. This number only includes those who have died in hospital having received a positive test for the virus. The latest UK daily figures available show 46,574 patients who tested positive for COVID-19 have sadly died from their illness, an increase of 8. This number refers to deaths in all settings and not just hospitals. And now, before we carry on into the rest of the programme, may I remind you that we are, of course, now on Twitter, and if you would like to comment during the programme at any time, you can get in touch with us at Broadcast Scot. On Twitter. So at Broadcast Scot is our address. And now to our first story this evening. The First Minister promises an urgent SQA review. Nicola Sturgeon has apologised to tens of thousands of Scottish teenagers whose exam results were downgraded last week and promised an urgent review of the results. The First Minister confirmed that her Deputy Education Secretary John Swinney would lay out proposals to regrade results in the Scottish Parliament tomorrow. We accept that we didn't get this right, and I'm sorry for that, Sturgeon said during her regular coronavirus briefing. She hinted that schools would now have to put up appeals for individual pupils or individual subject awards. Many pupils were angered last week after the Scottish Qualifications Authority, the SQA, downgraded 124,000 predicted awards, nearly a quarter of the total, after using statistical modelling to moderate the results following the cancellation of all exams during the coronavirus lockdown. Critics pointed out that the SQA methodology meant that students in the most deprived areas were around twice as likely to have awards downgraded than those from the least deprived areas. Scottish Greens education spokesperson Ross Greer MSP commented, "I'm pleased that the First Minister has now acknowledged that her government got this wrong and apologised. The working class young people who were unfairly treated last week need an urgent solution to this unacceptable situation." The Education Secretary's statement to Parliament must announce the kind of systematic solution that the Greens have demanded. Otherwise, confidence in this government's ability to discharge its responsibilities in education will come into question. Now, I think, Sam, I'll let you go first, as ladies first this evening, to comment on this story. Now, Nicola Sturgeon has offered an apology, a very heartfelt apology. It seemed she made no bones about the fact that they got this wrong. How do you think this compares, shall we say, with the response of other politicians to this kind of error? Do we normally see politicians apologising for things?
Sometimes when they're forced to, but whether it's sincere or not is another thing. But it's nice to see that Nicola Sturgeon has apologised for this, because this is kids' future. And yes, I understand last week certain politicians and things were saying, yeah, but if the kids had all got the grades that they were predicted and everything, we would have been up, and then there would have been criticism regarding the system again, saying that it was too easy or we never got it right. And I just think it's terrible we're in a state of affairs that we're frightened, or the politicians in the Scottish Government are frightened to celebrate the achievements of our youngsters, and fear of criticism of the system, the SQA system. And yes, it's great that they have turned round and come out and said, and it's hopefully now it's going to get sorted. These kids get the grades that they deserve, and they can celebrate the fact that they've done really well on something that has been unprecedented. You know, at the end of the day, they've had a pressure added onto them that no other generation's ever had.
Okay, well, listen, thank you for that, Sam. If I could come to you next, Andrew. I was just thinking there that there are many children, and many of whom are not really children now, and they're 16, 17, 18-year-olds who've been sitting hires and advanced hires. Many of those kids must have been doing extra work while they were at home. And it seems to me that the SQA has not just judged the kids here, but they've actually judged the schools, which struck me as being a rather strange situation. What do you think?
Well, I think, as Sam says, this was always going to be political. I think it's quite telling that it's Ross Greer who's the one who's leading the charge at the moment. And the reason I say that is it's telling that neither the representatives of the Labour Party in Scotland nor the representatives of the Tory Party in Scotland are making much hay out of this situation. I'm fairly confident that's the case because they know perfectly well the same challenges are being faced in the education system in Wales, and we have A-level results due out in England on Thursday, and we'll see exactly the same problem. The historical data that we have for performances by schools and thereby by implication by young people is really the only benchmark that we have to go on.
Yeah.
And so I do feel for the SQA, that's not an odd thing to say, and I do feel for the government in terms that whatever they had done, it was going to be there was going to be a punch up about this week. Now, I think it's interesting that how I read it is that having tested the water, I think perhaps the government feel that they misread the mood of the nation, and by that I mean the government and the SQA had taken a very much steady as she goes approach. That I think the performance this year was 2.5% better than last year.
It was, yes, that's true.
And that's kind of in track with the recent years improvement that we've seen, which are incremental in general. The suggestion is that if all of the grades that had been submitted by the schools had been followed, we'd have seen an uptick of something like 25% in the performance in the hires and advanced hires.
Yep.
And that inevitably that would then have turned into a kickabout on the basis that the grades were being unnecessarily inflated and that the qualifications were being devalued as a result. What I think we're seeing now is the government recognising that the mood of the nation, understandably, is that young people have had as difficult, if not more, a year this year so far as a result of the crisis. And I think the exceptional nature of this year has been underlined by the First Minister in her statements at lunchtime today. And I think the feeling perhaps politically is that the nation feels that young people should be given more attention and given a bit more thought rather than being processed through an examination sausage machine, which is in many ways what the SQA is. And so as a result, we're going to see a bit more of attention to the needs and wishes of young people as individuals, and that as a result, we're going to see a bit more attention to them. And I think if that happens, then we might find a satisfactory resolution to these challenges, which are, after all, pretty significant.
Yeah, okay. Well, Sam, I was going to ask you a question. This is one of those subjects where it doesn't matter what the government does. If the results are higher than they're supposed to be, they get pilloried for making things too easy. And if they're lower than they're supposed to be, they get pilloried because they're not teaching the children properly. It's one of those no-win situations, isn't it? So every year when the announcements are made, there's always somebody who's going to complain about it.
Yeah, there is, and it's a shame that kids are being used as a political football, because that's what's happened every single year when the results come out. But no, I just think it needs to stop. We need to start, if our kids are doing really well, we should be able to celebrate the fact that they're doing really, really well.
Yeah.
And schools should celebrate that, because that's an achievement. Not feel guilty and feel that crikey, are people going to accuse us of being too easy this year? It's just ridiculous. It really is just ridiculous. But you're right, it doesn't matter what the results were, whether it wasn't going to be there's going to be somebody who wasn't happy.
Okay. Andrew, just one final point. It occurred to me, actually, that people are going to now, unfortunately, for the rest of their lives, young people are going to have a cloud of, not suspicion, but a cloud of doubt hanging over their abilities, particularly when they go to university or they're looking for their first job. That there's always going to be this doubt about how well they really did. Is there any way that the government perhaps can direct universities to make sure that they believe these results, no matter what the circumstances?
Well, I think universities would start to find themselves in some pretty significant difficulties if they attempted to second guess the examination results which are published and verified. I think I would be surprised if universities went down that line in any year. But I would be particularly surprised if universities went down that line perhaps in the coming year. And I say that because we know that, or we expect, that the number of international students coming to study in the United Kingdom is going to drop significantly.
Yep.
And so I would be rather surprised if there's any suggestion that there aren't more than enough places at universities for young people to pursue the courses that they wish to follow. And the education sector broadly has to work together. Of course, this is an exceptional year, and of course, people have had all sorts of challenges. But the exam results are the exam results, and I think if the mood of the nation is now that young people should be afforded some measure of respect or latitude in respect of the challenges.
Well, just a little good faith, I think, would be nice, would it not?
Say again?
I was just going to say, I think a little good faith is what's required from universities and employers now towards these young people.
Precisely. There is no suggestion that this cohort is radically different in any respect from any other cohort taken as a whole. And so young people generally need a little bit of good faith and respect in that sense. And I think that is also replicated by the approach that I think we will see from the Scottish Government tomorrow, which is that individual students should be given a little bit more respect and their individual circumstances and performances given perhaps a little bit more weight in the system.
Okay, well, listen, thank you for that. We're going to move on to our next story now. And this time we are talking about the World Health Organization. There is a vast global gap between the funds needed to fight the coronavirus pandemic and the funds committed. World Health Organization Chief Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus said on Monday, and the WHO was only 10% of the way there. More than 19.92 million people have been reported to be infected by the coronavirus globally, and 729,803 people have died, according to Reuters' tally. Infections have been reported in more than 210 countries and territories since the first cases were identified in China in December 2019. For the vaccines alone, over $100 billion would be needed, Tedros said. This sounds like a lot of money, and it is, but it's small in comparison to the $10 trillion that have already been invested by the G20 countries in fiscal stimulus to deal with the consequences of the pandemic so far. Negotiations on the future of the WHO stalled last week after France and Germany refused to allow the US to take a lead, after President Trump said that he would stop funding the organization due to what he called its pro-China stance. Now, Sam, again, I'm going to come to you first for a comment on this. What do you make of this? The WHO is now saying that they only have a tenth of the money that they actually need to do something about this virus. Surely this is an emergency, and the rest of the world really needs to start getting its act together.
It's absolutely terrifying that they've only managed to raise that amount. Yeah, on the whole, it sounds like a lot of money, but as you said, it's really not. It's just terrifying trying to get my head around these figures. The thing is, I'm sure if it was to do with arms sales, nuclear wars and things like that, the money would be raised a lot quicker. This is people's lives and this is people's health. And at the end of the day, what people don't realise, it's not so much, yes, people are dying and yes, people are losing their lives, it's the long-term effects of this virus as well that we don't really know much about, how to affect the population long-term. And that will have then a big impact on the economy because people are not fit to go back to work, depending on the damage that's done to people.
Thanks, Sam. Okay, if you could get your response to this, Andrew. It struck me that when I heard this, that Tedros was basically saying that prevention is better than cure here because the governments of the world, of the G20, the richest and wealthiest nations on the planet, have put in $10 trillion into fiscal stimulus and pumping money into their economies. Why not spend a fraction more on actually preventing people from getting the disease in the first place? And surely that is going to save trillions more.
Yeah, that's absolutely right, Gordon. I think we see here again the malign hand of Trump, the Trump wrecking ball, doing its utmost to disrupt and defund organisations which are important for the health and safety of the population of the planet. But of course, Trump doesn't think in those terms. Trump thinks in Trump's family, and that's about the size of it. So I think we definitely need to see a strengthening and a resurgence of commitment and money into the WHO and to other UN institutions as well, which the Americans have from time to time threatened to defund. I also think perhaps we might see again a little bit of politics coming in here with China perhaps offering to step into the breach a little bit and seeking political advantage following on from the calamitous behaviour of the US president. So I wouldn't be surprised. So there's two things. This funding needs to be put in place and quickly, or else the virus will continue to circle the planet and we will not make headway. At the same time, I think we might see other governments, for example, the Chinese, seek to make advantage by filling that part of that funding gap and making President Trump look even more like an idiot than he already is.
Well, thank you. I think I'll end that particular item on that comment, actually. We're moving on, moving back to the UK for our next item this evening, and this about our Prime Minister, Boris Johnson. Boris Johnson fears the loss of the UK's power and magic. Prime Minister Boris Johnson said today that the UK would be weaker if the union that binds its four nations were broken, in his latest foray into campaigning against Scottish independence. The Union of the United Kingdom is, for me, the greatest political partnership the world has ever seen, Boris Johnson told reporters when asked what the union meant to him. It would be such a shame to lose the power, the magic of that union. Johnson and other senior ministers have made a series of visits to Scotland in recent weeks, and the Prime Minister has even suggested that he'll be taking a holiday in Scotland soon. Well, Sam, this is a story which I am certain that you will have an opinion about. I'm just waiting to hear what you have to say about this one. No laughing now.
Honestly, it's just mad for real. Honestly,
the power and the magic.
Oh, I know, that's great, isn't it?
What a wonderful phrase.
Oh, isn't it? At the end of the day, the man's no delusional. I think he needs to go and see a psychiatrist to get himself a wee psychic. But the one thing I'm scared of is the power that he believes he holds. And he doesn't hold any power. It's bloody Cummins. It's not. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Andrew. That's quite funny.
Well, I'm obviously not going to get any more sense out of Sam on that, so I am going to throw this open to you, Andrew, for maybe something slightly more cerebral on this subject. The power and the magic, will it be lost as the union ends?
Well, it shows how disconnected from reality Boris Johnson and his little double R The notion of there being power and magic associated to very much of the Union is perhaps a matter of historical interest for those who want to indulge in cultural archaeology looking for that power and the magic. Because I don't think very many people in the United Kingdom, and I think very few people worldwide, would regard the current Union as in any way representing power or magic. We recognise the malign influence of the British Empire over the last 200 years around the world, and we recognise the malign influence of the Westminster government in European politics and in the lives of the people of Scotland, so that Johnson is deluding himself with some kind of Harry Potter-esque tale of the power and the magic of the Union. That's fine. As a work of fiction, it might sell. As a work of fact,
well, there definitely is a bit of a similarity between Westminster and Hogwarts. I think we'd all agree there. But surely Boris Johnson is very far from being a wizard of any great any great importance. But anyway, he has also said, I mean, I come back to his first part of his quote here, the Union of the United Kingdom is for me the greatest political partnership the world has ever seen. Now, was the Union, do you think, Sam, ever a partnership? Or was it more of a forced marriage, do you think?
Yeah, that's what it's like, isn't it? It's like a forced marriage. It's certainly no partnership. So again, the man's absolutely delusional. I think if we were being led by Hogwarts, we would be doing it would be a bit better, I suppose. But honest to goodness, the man is an absolute train wreck. He really is. He is honestly, you think the people voted this man in as a Prime Minister, it's like, really? Honestly? Who thought that was a good idea?
Yeah, I often think Boris Johnson's hyperbole is actually even more hyperbolic than anyone else's. I mean, he can come up with these incredible sound bites that just make people laugh. I mean, this one particularly made me laugh, especially the one about the power and the magic. Anyway, having spoken about power and magic, actually is bringing us back to another Boris Johnson comment today. And Boris Johnson has been scapegoating immigrants today. Mr. Johnson has been accused of scapegoating and using inaccurate and inflammatory language to describe the plight of people risking their lives crossing the Channel to seek asylum in the United Kingdom. Humanitarian groups and charities criticised the Prime Minister for describing migrant crossings as very bad, stupid and dangerous and criminal on Monday, and those were his exact words. They urged the government to offer safe and legal routes into Britain for people seeking refuge from violence and persecution. As record numbers of people crossing the Dover Strait in small boats continue to arrive, an RAF A400M Atlas transport plane flew back and forth scouring the waters between southeast England and northern France following a Home Office request for military assistance to patrol the Channel. More than 4,100 people have reached the UK so far this year in small boats, travelling across the world's busiest shipping lane, and a Border Force patrol vessel met more than 20 Syrians in a dinghy today. Now, Andrew, I think I'll come to you first on this. It dawned on me when I looked at the numbers here that if there have only been 4,000 people, or 4,100 in the last 8 months, then we're looking at a maximum of about 6,000 people a year entering in small boats. That's hardly a lot of people, is it?
Correct. This really feels like a fairly classic Dominic Cummings dead cat. At a time when the Westminster government's performance in connection with the coronavirus crisis is beginning to come under a little bit more of a sharper spotlight, and the feelings of Johnson and his cabinet in respect of the management of the crisis, lo and behold, we're now pointing our fingers at people who have attempted to extract themselves from war zones and situations where, let's not forget, it tends to be weapons that we have helped to manufacture ourselves that are being used. So people are seeking to save themselves and their families by travelling and seeking refuge. These people are refugees. Lo and behold, they are thrown onto the table by Cummings to distract from the Westminster government's own failings. I can remember David Cameron being criticised for inappropriate language some considerable time ago. my views as to Theresa May's racist policies and racist conduct have been reported on this programme before, and lo and behold, a right-wing Tory government are now indulging in the same shameless and shameful behaviour.
Okay, Sam, I mean, we've heard the words being used here, but the one I think that leapt out at everybody was the word criminal being used to describe people who are fleeing persecution, who are fleeing war in Syria. Is it criminal to sail a rubber dinghy across the English Channel? I don't think it was the last time I looked.
No, it's not. But what I would say is the British government are more likely to be criminals, allegedly, due to the fact of their behaviour and the way they're treating fellow human beings. At the end of the day, as Andrew said, if it wasn't for our part in the weapons trade, then maybe there wouldn't be refugees seeking refuge. At the end of the day, this is what people feel to grasp. People are not going to travel all these miles with children and, putting their lives in danger.
And of course, they're using up their life savings as well, Sam, to unscrupulous people traveling.
That's the thing. People only do that out of desperation. And to me, this is, as Andrew says, they're using this as a distraction technique from what the government are really doing. And but we know that the Tories are a right-wing party, they're a right-wing government, and what they're trying to do is stoke up a kind of hatred amongst their party faithful, the ones that vote for them.
I don't think it would take much stirring, Sam. No, it's already there.
Yeah, and this is what they're doing. They're stoking that fire, and it's shocking. It's disgusting.
One thing that struck me, Sam, here, and I mentioned this to our scriptwriter before we came on air, is the fact that with this number of people, they're basically doing the same thing that people from Dunkirk did in World War II. They were coming across the channel in small boats. And it actually dawned on me it would be cheaper for the British government to rent a flotilla of small boats and take all of these people off the beach in Dunkirk and take them over to the United Kingdom in one go and give them all a place to live. It would be cheaper. They wouldn't have to fly planes and helicopters, and they wouldn't have to patrol the border day and night, year after year, trying to stop it from happening. It's ridiculous.
Just think what would happen, Gordon, if they were to just spend that money and get 6,000 people over and process them, get them part of our society, give them a home, make sure they get work, they've got support and everything. What are we going to gain in return? We're going to gain some more cultural knowledge. We're going to gain people paying taxes and contributing towards society. We're going to gain so much from these people. But what would happen if the shoe was on the other feet, that something was to happen in this country and everybody from here was to start leaving and go and seek refuge in other countries? How would these people feel then? The ones that are criticising this. I bet they would be the first ones on the boats going to the other countries to seek refuge.
That's a good way to end that, I think, Sam. Thank you. I'm going to move to our next story now, and a jobs warning has come. A jobs warning grows, I beg your pardon, as 1 in 3 firms plan for cuts. The UK government must rethink its rash and reckless plan to wind down its furlough scheme, the SNP has said, after a new survey revealed that around 1 in 3 employers expect to make job cuts this autumn as the support scheme draws to an end. The research by the Chartered Institute of the Chartered Institute of Personnel and Development, the CIPD, and ADICO, the recruitment firm, found that around 33% of the 2,000 firms polled said that they expected to make redundancies. The findings in the period up to the start of July also showed a 50% increase in the number of employers planning for job losses compared to 3 months ago. The stark warning comes as around 10,000 job losses were already recently announced at leading companies, including Travelex, WH Smith, Pizza Express, Hayes Travel, Dixon's Carphone, M&Co, LGH, DW Sports, ICOM, Prestwick Airport, William Hill and Sodexo. So it's quite a list of blue chip companies planning to lay people off. I think, Andrew, I'll come to you first for a reaction to this. I dare say you're not surprised by this particular report today.
No, not surprised at all, Gordon. I think we're in line for what can only be described as a very sombre autumn with regard to employment in the United Kingdom. We've seen many estimates suggesting that the impact of the crisis will be the most severe in the United Kingdom in comparison to all other G7 and G9 countries, and that doesn't come as a surprise. I think other comparisons that we are making include comparing the furlough scheme that is being suggested for the United Kingdom in comparison with the furlough scheme in Germany, which I understand has been put in place now for 2 years. And I think those timescales sound much more rational and sensible in terms of mitigating the economic effects that we know that this crisis is going to bring. So I've said it here before, and I haven't changed my view. I think we're looking at a very dark autumn in terms of employment, and I think that it's incumbent on the UK government to get its finger out, to perhaps think a little bit further than the dogmatic approach that they seem to be taking, and start to put the wider economy and people first.
Andrew, I was reading a report by Tax Research UK, which is a fairly well-known blogger online, who is saying or claimed that the British government could quite easily continue the furlough scheme indefinitely because it could basically order the creation of new money. In other words, quantitative easing was already being used to pay for the furlough scheme, and to claim that somehow or other they didn't have the money was disingenuous. Would you agree with that assessment?
I would be slightly stronger than disingenuous. It's a deliberate lie. Of course, a sovereign government can continue to print money in those terms to buy its own debt and to pursue quantitative easing. It was pretty clear that in 2008 the quantitative easing that was put in place was pretty much unlimited. And having proved that principle in response to the crisis in 2008, the only reason it's not being done right now is that the money's not being used to pay for bankers.
All right, okay. Sam, a very quick response from you on this. The loss of all these jobs, Sam, what effect do you think this is going to have on Scottish economy?
It's going to be devastating, Gordon, and I agree with everything that Andrew's just said, but yeah, it's going to be absolutely devastating, because what you're seeing happening with the big businesses and small businesses, they are preparing themselves for the future. No, the future's uncertain now, and because they don't have the furlough scheme to fall back on, or the furlough scheme as it was, and it's, the 80%, they're having to cut back in wages, because what happens if a local area goes into lockdown, there's a local lockdown, these businesses need to close, and there's, apart from statutory sick pay, there's nothing in place. There is nothing in place for these businesses. So the companies need to protect themselves, and that's up to the government to do something and step in. But as Andrew said, if it was the banks, it would be a completely different ballgame. They'd be stepping in, and they would be there with the hands out saying, take what we need. And that's just not happening, and we do need it for the future at least.
Okay, thank you, Sam. Okay, I'm moving along to our next story this evening. And Belarus's election has provoked protests. The main opposition candidate in Belarus's election has rejected the official results that gave President Alexander Lukashenko a landslide victory, and her team has vowed to stay in the country to campaign for a change of power. I will believe my own eyes that a majority was for us, Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, I need to take that one slowly, told reporters in the capital Minsk on Monday after widespread reports of vote tampering in Sunday's election. Tikhanovskaya said that she considered herself an election winner, not Lukashenko, and described the election as massively rigged. Her aides and the opposition wanted a vote recount at polling stations where there were problems. They also said that the opposition wanted to hold talks with the authorities about how to bring about a peaceful change of power. The country's election commission reported on Monday that Lukashenko had won 80.23% of the vote, while I'll get this right one day, Tikhanovskaya took 9.9%, despite a popular wave of support for the opposition candidate, whose political rallies have drawn some of the country's largest crowds since the days of the Soviet Union. Similar preliminary results released on Sunday prompted unprecedented protests in cities across the country, posing the greatest threat to Lukashenko, often referred to as Europe's last dictator, since he came to power 26 years ago. There were bloody clashes as riot police used rubber bullets, flash grenades, tear gas and water cannon to suppress demonstrators. Police detained about 3,000 people. Russia's ROIA agency cited the Belarusian Interior Ministry as saying further protests are expected tonight. Lukashenko's victory was quickly endorsed by Vladimir Putin of Russia and Xi Jinping of China. The Ukrainian president, Volodymyr Zelensky, stopped short of congratulating Lukashenko in a statement and called for restraint. Now, this particular election has actually been raised in an argument, I think, as well in politics in Scotland today. But let me come to you first, Sam. Lukashenko is regarded as the kind of last dictator in Europe, and this does look, on the face of it, a remarkably high number of votes for the man. 80% of the vote does seem amazingly large for a majority. What do you think? Is it likely this was rigged? Are we going to see another revolution?
Oh, it looks definitely as rigged by the looks of things. What a load of,
In your opinion?
that we're made to believe, in my opinion, that we're made to believe. Hopefully we are going to see another revolution and he is going to be knocked off the perch. But I pray that it's not violent and it's nobody loses their lives or anything like that, because that's the last thing we want. But there's definitely change needed. Definitely. It's just, it's been rigged, definitely. That's all I can say. It's definitely been rigged.
Okay, Sam, thanks. Andrew, what's your response to this news tonight that Lukashenko has had this gigantic landslide majority? I mean, it seems a little unlikely, I would say.
Well, it struck me very quickly. We were talking about measuring performance over time. I think this majority for Lukashenko was down on last time. I think he was not percent last time. Maybe even he is having one eye to the price. However, videos of the violence on the streets, videos of the people starting to push back against the Interior Ministry forces. I've certainly watched videos this afternoon of crowds of citizens stopping the Interior Ministry troops from causing trouble, and the Interior Ministry troops doing the right thing and stepping back. So I think that, combined with other evidence, we've seen the internet being shut down in parts of Belarus over the weekend, and other things that might regard as being symptoms of dictatorship, which is in permanent decline. I only hope that Lukashenko recognises the writing on the wall. Undoubtedly, his accounts and his bank accounts in a number of tax havens will be well stocked, and perhaps for the good of everybody in Belarus, including his family, maybe now is the time to go ahead.
And how do you see, Andrew? How do you see the support which has come from Vladimir Putin, from Xi Jinping, and from Volodymyr Zelensky? Took a slightly more conciliatory sort of tone, but the two men who've jumped straight in there are obviously the two most totalitarian leaders in the world at the moment to support him.
Certainly, they run fairly heavy-handed regimes. I'll agree with you in that respect. I know that Lukashenko was accusing the Russians of interfering in their election. Last weekend, he was making accusations against both the Americans and the Russians for interfering, which probably reflects more on Lukashenko than it does on either the Russians or the Americans. However, I think the it certainly feels to me that this is the beginning of an end game for Lukashenko.
Well, let's hope so. The Belarusians are known to be a relatively peaceful people and not given over to violent insurrection. Anyway, we are now going to move to Lebanon. And Lebanese ministers are quitting. Lebanon's besieged government is poised to fall after more than a third of ministers quit their posts, forcing the Prime Minister Hassan Diab to resign. Diab, who's been Prime Minister for 9 months, is due to notify the President, Michel Aoun, who is expected to accept his resignation. Diab will address the nation at 7:30 p.m. local time. However, the move is unlikely to lead to a clean sweep of the embattled government, with current ministers, including those who have resigned, set to assume caretaker role to form the backbone of a new administration. Instead, a push is underway for more than a third of sitting MPs to quit Parliament, which would force new parliamentary elections and could lead to an injection of new members less tainted by corruption and nepotism. Lebanon's leadership has been teetering on the brink in the past week since an enormous explosion destroyed Beirut's port and damaged nearby areas, killing at least 164 people and wounding up to 6,000 more. Decades of incompetence and graft have underpinned a decision to keep a stockpile of close to 2,750 tonnes of ammonium nitrate at the port and to store it with combustible substances. The explosion has cast a spotlight on weak governance in the Mediterranean state, which was already reeling from an economic implosion that threatened the livelihoods of millions of people. Okay, Sam, we know that this explosion in Lebanon has wreaked havoc. But now we're seeing the political fallout from this. Their government looks like it's about to fall apart. What do you think? The people are obviously calling for a change. Is this going to be enough, do you think, to push the Lebanese government to have a new election and to elect some hopefully non-corrupt politicians who can get them out of this situation?
Basically, yeah, hopefully it is enough, because the problem with Libya is all the corruption within the government and politicians. So,
Lebanon, yeah, Sam.
Lebanon, sorry.
Sorry.
I know, sorry. They're needing new blood, and what happened last week was just unforgivable. I know they were saying they were trying to get rid of it, and they couldn't, and it was getting stored and whatever. But that was just it's unforgivable. It's just, and it's the aftermath of that. So hopefully the people have got enough people power to push this forward. They're already doing really well at the moment, so hopefully they can keep going and get new blood into the government and get this sorted, because between COVID and what's happening, what happened over there, the food supplies were destroyed as well. It's just absolutely heartbreaking. So the corruption needs to be stamped out.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Sam. Okay. Very, very briefly, Andrew, your response to this news, it seemed inevitable. Do you think it really was inevitable that the government would fall as a result of this event?
Well, it's an interesting point, Gordon. I suppose that the ministers in government are in a sense taking responsibility by standing down. Indicates that there is some degree of responsibility and some degree of that some political institutions are functioning. However, at a time of crisis upon crisis upon crisis for the people of Lebanon, as you mentioned, a collapse in currency and an economic crisis, COVID, ongoing political and military tensions in the region, with a number of neighbouring states, and now this huge explosion, considerable loss of life, and fundamental damage to the national infrastructure. One heart goes out to the people who are in the Lebanon at the moment, and I can only hope that a solution is found which allows political direction to be maintained at a time when it is most needed in order to make progress in looking after people who have been badly affected.
Okay, well, thank you, Andrew. We're going to move on now to China, in fact, to Hong Kong, I should say. Jimmy Lai has been arrested under Hong Kong security law. The Hong Kong media tycoon Jimmy Lai became the highest profile person arrested under new national security laws on Monday, detained over suspected collusion with foreign forces as around 200 police searched the offices of his Apple Daily newspaper. The mainland-born Lai, who was smuggled into Hong Kong on a fishing boat when he was a penniless 12-year-old, has been one of the most prominent democracy activists in the Chinese-ruled city and an ardent critic of Beijing. His arrest comes amid Beijing's crackdown against pro-democracy opposition in the city and further stokes concerns about media and other reforms promised to the former British colony when it returned to China in 1997. China imposed the sweeping new security law on Hong Kong on June the 30th, drawing condemnation from Western countries. The arrest bears out the worst fears that Hong Kong's national security law would be used to suppress crucial pro-democracy opinion and to restrict press freedom, said Steve Butler, the Committee to Protect Journalists Asia Programme Coordinator. Now, I'd like to talk to you first, Andrew, about this one. This is obviously the Chinese authorities taking out a very big player from the chessboard here in terms of Hong Kong politics and a media tycoon, a man who is responsible for directing the pro-democracy media. This surely has been an attempt to cut the head off the snake.
I think, Gordon, that's absolutely right. It struck me as being what I can only call a Putin-esque approach in terms of removing people who are perceived to be a threat from the board. The oligarchs who were tried and tried in show trials as Putin came to power, and this feels exactly the same. I'm bound to say I can think of one or two newspaper owners in the UK who might be benefiting from having their collars felt by the law, but in terms of China, this is a significant concern. This individual had clearly put his head above the parapet in many, many ways, and that the Chinese state feel that they are empowered to begin to attack the media organisations who are the current settlement in Hong Kong is a significant concern.
Because now, I guess now that most, shall we say, pro-freedom of speech journalists now are going to be terrified that they'll be next.
Yes, the arrest and trial of journalists worldwide is a problem, but this focus, we know that the mainland Chinese security agencies moved back into Hong Kong over the past 3 or 4 weeks, and I suspect this is the first headline case of those security forces beginning to flex their muscles and get their horns out.
Okay. Thank you for that. Now, I'm going to move on to the next story. Sam, I'll give you a chance to comment on this story just in a moment. We're just a little pressed for time. Now, an MSP has renewed its calls to keep Redford Barracks open. The SNP has challenged the Tory Scottish Secretary to rethink the closure of Redford Cavalry and Infantry Barracks and to take the opportunity to apologise for the drastic cuts to Scotland's defence footprint when he visited the historic site today. Alistair Jack visited the barracks in Edinburgh Pentlands, which is due for closure by 2025. Gordon MacDonald, MSP, who has been campaigning for the barracks to remain open for almost a decade, has renewed calls to protect the barracks and encouraged the Tories to rethink the closure, which would have a devastating effect on the local community in Edinburgh Pentlands. So, Sam, now I know we don't often talk about defence on the East Coast. Most of the time we were always talking about Faz Lane. But here is another story of what appears to be the United Kingdom taking jobs out of Scotland again. Do you think this is what this is about? Is this the reason why they are planning to close these barracks?
More than likely, Gordon, and a wee secret, I'm an ex-military wife, and we were based many, many years ago at Redford Barracks. So I actually have a... Yes.
Well, I've given you a fantastic question to answer, Sam.
Yeah, and you know something, the community there is amazing, absolutely amazing. I loved my time as a military wife in that area and living in Edinburgh and around it, Redford Barracks, and it's an amazing building. It's amazing barracks. There's lots of history behind it and everything. And even though we don't talk about the military, we don't talk about defence and things like that, one thing about Scottish history is it's very entangled with the UK history of the military and things like that.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of being stationed there. Yeah, it's been done deliberate, and they're weakening the jobs in Scotland, and this is one of the ways, because what people don't realise is a lot of these barracks, especially the army barracks, employ civilians as well, and the local community, so it does provide jobs either directly or indirectly, because I was actually married in Edinburgh, at one of the military barracks. I had a military wedding way back when I was 18. I was a baby.
Wow.
I know I was a wee baby, but it's it's like one of those ones like, oh my goodness, I was just a baby. Don't ever do it. Don't do it. For anybody watching. But no, at the end of the day, our forces, our Scottish forces, they do a fantastic job and everything else, and I know a lot of them, even the veterans and things, that support independent Scotland. That doesn't come into it, so and it's jobs, and it's a historic barracks, and it's an amazing place. If you've never been to it, it's amazing.
I'll take your word for it, Sam. Well, listen, thank you for that. It's nice to have a personal experience of that. Now, I'm going to come back again to you in a moment, Andrew. We're just moving on to our next story now, as we are running slightly late. And this year's SQA exam results have seen a significant increase in the percentage of students getting A to C grades at Fife College. Across National 5 and higher exams, there were 12 subject areas that saw higher pass rates, leading to a 12% increase overall in the number of students achieving good results. This included strong showings from students in several STEM subject areas. These results come after students suffered significant disruption to their teaching schedules thanks to the coronavirus, with teaching being conducted online after campuses shut down. Commenting on the results of the Vice Principal of Fife College, Dorothy Leslie, acknowledged the tremendous effort of the college's students to achieve these results despite the disruption of their learning. Dorothy Leslie said, "I'm hugely proud of the students in Fife College for achieving these great results, and the increase in pass rates is a reflection on the incredible work being done at the college by these students and their teachers." Now, I'm just going to tag on at the end of this story another report today, which is just responding to the First Minister's apology to young people in admission that the Scottish Government got it wrong, and of course they now know that is now going to be sorted out. So let's concentrate on the positives here. We're hearing that in this particular case, the exam results are on the up again here, Andrew, and this is something which obviously has got lost in the British media's news coverage today, that there has been an increase in the success rate of Scottish students.
Yep, that's absolutely right, Gordon. As I mentioned at the beginning, as I understand it, the overall performance is about 2.5 percentage points up, which is in line with the improvement that we've been seeing for several years. The performance of the young people at Fife College is testament to their hard work and the hard work of the teachers and all those who go to make the institution run. And I think from conversations I've had with teachers across Scotland over the last few days, I'm hearing examples of cohorts in a range of schools and in a range of settings who have performed extremely well and are showing the focus that there has been both from teachers and from the Scottish Government, particularly on STEM subjects, is beginning to bear some fruit.
Okay, so I'd like to finish that on a positive note. Our final story this evening before we close is another good news story. The Drinking Water Quality Regulator for Scotland's annual test report shows that Scottish Water's compliance with the stringent standards for drinking water remains high at 99.92%. The report covering drinking water quality in Scotland during 2019 states that a total of 310,605 regulatory tests were carried out on Scotland's drinking water last year. Scottish Water take and analyse samples from drinking water from treatment works, storage points and customers' taps throughout the year. And of these, taken from samples at consumers, TAP's 99.92% met the required standards, a slight improvement on last year and consistent with previous years. And drinking water quality regulator Sue Petch said, "I'm pleased to report that compliance with standards has been sustained at a high level. This verifies our trust in the drinking water supplied by Scottish Water continues to be of the highest quality. We should not take water quality for granted, and challenges such as climate change, altering demand patterns and the capacity of treatment assets will all have an increasing impact on water quality in the future. I'll continue my work to ensure that Scottish Water meets these challenges by planning ahead and investing appropriately." So very briefly to you, Sam, a good news story. Our drinking water is still amongst the finest in the world.
Yeah, it sure is, and we don't need science to tell us that. We can taste that. We know our water is fabulous. But on a very quick note, when I was at college studying environmental sciences many moons ago in a previous life,
Yeah.
I remember doing a report on this and talking to Scottish Water about this and about doing a study myself on the quality of our drinking water. And a lot of the times our water is actually, tap water is actually better quality than bottled water.
Excellent. Thank you, Sam. Well, a final word to you tonight, Andrew, on the quality of Scotland's water. Certainly Scotland must be the best place to drink tea in the world.
Well, there's plenty of water starting to fall out of the sky again here, but that's not. But the quality of the water certainly reflects the hard work that Scottish Water and its staff do, and I think it's a testament again to show that retaining key assets like Scottish Water in the public domain and not privatising it works best.
Okay. Well, listen, we've just about run out of time. I know we started a little late this evening, but it just remains for me to remind you that if you would like to support Broadcasting Scotland to make more programmes like Scotland at 7, you can do that by becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter. If you'd like to do so, you can follow the instructions on your screen now. It gives all of our contact details. But if you want to become a supporter, go to broadcastingscotland.scot/register and follow the prompt from there. That is it from this Monday evening edition of Scotland at 7. So I'd just like to thank my two guests, Andrew Wilson and Sam Payton, and say thank you very much for being with us, and we'll see you next time. A very good night to you.